Alright, hey guys, this is Yoda. In this video, I'll talk about how to manage your stats as a prop paladin. I've been getting a lot of questions about like verse, crit, haste, mastery, how much of whatever do you need? And I'm planning to answer those all in this video. So, as everyone knows by now, your Season 3 tier set synergizes incredibly well with crit, especially on single target. And that's because both of this tier set bonuses interact with hammer and anvil. And if you look at the Lightsmith tree, Hammer and Anvil basically says whenever you crit your judgment, or with your tier set, if you also crit with Blessed Hammer, then it triggers the tier set, triggers Hammer and Anvil, big AoE damage, and lesser weapon, etc. So crit is very important. One thing that I have noticed is that on AoE, while crit is very important, it's not like super crazy. Like I have 28,000 crit right now on my character. You probably don't need that much. The reason is that Blessed Hammer is limited to one tier set proc per usage, one hammer and anvil proc per usage. So before, like on PTR, you would use Blessed Hammer, it would hit the pack like 10 times, and each of those 10 times had a chance to roll a crit. Now, after the first time it rolls a crit, the other ones cannot proc hammer and anvil anymore. Uh, so which means on AoE, well, your judgment is only hitting one time, so crit is still very important. Your Blessed Hammer is basically guaranteed to hit a hammer and anvil proc if there's a lot of mobs, because it's just going to hit like all the mobs, and then one of those will roll a crit for sure if you have any amount of crit at all. So crit is really important for your judgment damage proccing hammer and anvil, but it's not as important for Blessed Hammer, which means I would say past 20% DR, crit is probably not that great. Like if you look at my current gear set, I have like 29,000 crit, plus I'm wearing an antenna, and I have critical overlord from the disc belt. So this is way too much crit. I would say in this gear set, it's probably better to use a Verse Flask potentially, or a Haste Flask. I think Haste Flask is what I settled on. Speaking of Haste, since you value crits so much, and Verse is actually really good for your hammer and anvil damage, Haste is actually not as good as I originally thought. I would still get up to like 20k the first DR, but going past that, I would say is going to lose you quite a bit of damage. It's still decent, defensively. You do get slightly lower cooldowns on your defensives. But the fact that Blessed Hammer is such a valuable global now, and you have more globals since you need to use Holy Bulwark and Third Weapon, you have like more globals taken up by other stuff, means you don't need as much haste as before. I would say up to first DR, like 20k, is definitely still really good. Gonna let you keep 100% uptime on Shield of the Righteous and still give you a decent amount of CDR. Past that though, once you start hitting diminishing returns, I would say haste is not as valuable. Which means, we want crit up to like the first DR or the second DR, I would say, which is like 28,000 about. And haste up to the first DR, since it's season 3, we still have a lot more stats than that, especially if you're playing like the disc belt and the antenna. If you're playing disc belt and antenna, by the way, I probably wouldn't go this high on crit. I would go like 22,000 maybe or something, since these are going to give you on average a lot of crit. Anyway, so after those, you have to choose basically between verse and mastery. Mastery is quite useful in some dungeons, but in the dungeons where it's useless, it is really bad. It's significantly worse than verse, especially for damage. Even defensively, I would say it's not as good as verse. In the dungeons that it's not good for, which we'll go over now. So this is my first gear set. Obviously, I would haste flask, maybe wear a little bit more crit when my gear gets better. But yeah, second gear set is my spell block tier set, or spell block set. So I have 74 or 7,500 mastery, and then I just mastery flask to fix it. Bang. And now I'm over the breakpoint, which is 9,400 or 10,600, depending on if you have a shaman or not. This is the breakpoint where you get 100% spell block. Right now, you can say I have 51.5% block. If we add a shaman, then that would be 52%. And then plus Holy Bulwark is 60%, and then plus Barricade of Faith would be 60, and then, or would be 70, sorry. And with Faith in the Light active, that's 100%. So the reason 100% spell block is a relevant number and 100% block is not, is that most of the tank busters in this game are magical and blockable. I say most, but most of the relevant ones honestly are actually magical and blockable, whereas the physical ones can sometimes be blocked, but you're like a paladin, so you have a lot of armor, and generally physical tank busters are not lethal whatsoever, whereas magical busters actually are. So let's say you only had 99% spell block, well, then 1% of the time, if you're reliant on your spell block fighting this boss, then you would die. That is an unacceptable mortality rate for a tank in keys. If you die 1%, like 1% of the time that this boss casts a tank buster on you, that's way too many deaths for a tank to deal with in a season. So you want to be up to 100% for those types of things. However, 100% block is like actually attainable, but I don't think it's worth it. The reason is 100% block and like 95% block are not super different on a random trash pack, because let's say 20 mobs hit you, by the law of large numbers, you're going to block about 95% of them. It's not like one thing is hitting you and 5% of the time you die, 95% of the time you live. It's like 20 things are hitting you, and as long as you block like 18 of them, you'll live. Or even 15 of them out of 20. If you have enough block chance, that is very likely to happen. Uh, which is why I would say it's not important to get to 100% block, especially because Faith in the Light doesn't really have that high uptime. But 100% spell block is very relevant, so I would play the minimum amount of mastery to get that. Take it out of either your crit or your verse, depending on what you have like more of, and then run it like that. Right now, I would say this gear set has a little bit too much mastery, but it is what it is. All right, and then I have actually made another gear set, which is stacking a lot of mastery in exchange for crit. Uh, there are actually two dungeons in the dungeon pool which I consider mastery to be very useful in. And those dungeons are Priory of the Sacred Flame and Operation Floodgate. So this is a recent discovery slash recently tested. I did time 19 Floodgate and Priory on the Paladin using this gear set with like 15,000 mastery, including Mastery Flask. I think it might have even had a little bit more on, I don't remember. But basically, those two dungeons feature extremely dangerous dots. Let me see if I still have the breakdown for our Priory. I do. Healing done of the Priory. It's actually not as relevant for Divine Bulwark. It's actually not as relevant in Priory, but in Floodgate, Divine Bulwark goes crazy. So Divine Bulwark is your mastery. While in your consecration, you have a chance to block harmful periodic effects. In Floodgate, a lot of the damage you take is harmful periodic effects. For instance, Big Mama's Electro Crush is extremely dangerous for Prot Paladin. That gets reduced by your mastery. The random dot that all the mobs put on you, I think it's called like Black Blood, whatever, gets also reduced by your mastery, and Swamp Face's dot also gets reduced by your mastery. So actually having extremely high mastery, I would say extremely, but it's not even up to first DR. Having a decent amount of mastery is very useful in Floodgate for sure. In Priory, I did test it, and I also find it to be somewhat useful. There's a lot of damage in Priory that's not really parryable. For instance, if we look at MDT, we're gonna go to Priory right now. These archers, our sharpshooters, are very dangerous for tanks. The shoot ability, one shoot isn't going to be that crazy, but oftentimes you're doing pulls with like three or four of these things. And shoot is not parryable, so every point of crit that you have is basically useless against these archers. Whereas mastery does work, but it gives you increases your block chance. So having a decent amount of block, not 100%, 100% is completely irrelevant, is actually useful against these. Also, there's this guy who puts a dot on you. This first boss puts a dot on you. Actually, I kind of want to see my healing done on Captain Dalcry, because a lot of the damage you take on Captain Dalcry is the dot. Okay, I have to scroll a little bit too far to see it. Wait, where is it? Healing done. Captain Dalcry. Okay, I guess it doesn't work on Captain Dalcry, so that's great. Anyway, uh, as I was saying before we got sidetracked by that, uh, it's mainly, I would say, for the sharpshooters, I guess, since it doesn't actually work on Captain Dalcry for some reason. These sharpshooters are very dangerous for you with shoot, and having a very high block chance is actually very useful uh, in Priory. It does also randomly work on this guy, but yeah, high mastery in Priory, in my opinion, is actually quite valuable, and in Floodgate for sure. Priory, I'm not so sure about anymore, at least. Floodgate for sure, and mastery is actually really good. I was having a really tough time surviving 19 Floodgate, and then I switched to like a decently high mastery build, and it suddenly became a lot easier. Although I don't think I would play this master build anywhere else. Like you might be tempted to think, ooh, it makes you really tanky in Floodgate. Maybe it's really useful in other places. But I would say in Floodgate in particular, there's quite a few dangerous enemies where parry is ineffective, whereas parry is super effective against a lot of other things, especially like in Arkar and Halls. So I wouldn't like dump all your crit for mastery if you're trying to feel tanky. I would only do it in these two dungeons. Anyway, those are my three main stat layouts for Paladin. And that's one of the video. All right, thank you all for watching. Peace out.